Anti-racism protests in Charlottesville, Virginia. They stayed peaceful on Saturday, 1 year after a far-right rally that turned deadly in that city. There was no sign of white supremacists in attendance there, but those groups are expected to march later in the nation's capital, right in front of the White House. Let's talk more about this now with Jawn Murray. Jawn, a television journalist and pop culture expert, joining this hour from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your time today. In the coming hours, we are likely to see racists in full bloom outside the nation's capital, protected by the First Amendment to say whatever they want to say, but seemingly re-energized, feeling freer to spout hate. How do you see it?
You know, George, it's an unfortunate thing because just last Sunday, I actually had brunch at a restaurant right across from the White House. And so today, I won't be going into downtown D.C. because I want to avoid the madness that's taking place down there at all costs. And, you know, it's appropriate that these hate groups would be marching outside of the White House because there's a lot of hate in this country that originates right there at the White House. And so maybe Donald Trump and his administration will open the doors up for these people and they'll feel at home because a lot of their counterparts work there in that very administration.
Jawn, I have a similar story. It was a couple of months ago. I was traveling with family from Atlanta, Georgia, down to South Alabama to visit my wife's great aunt. Excited about it, had mother-in-law, my son in the car, but came to realize there was a white supremacist rally right in the middle of my route, so no stops for us. Disappointing, sad. But that's kind of the way things are.
George, when you think about how some people from this administration and on other networks, they call groups that advocate for civil rights and social justice like Black Lives Matter a hate group, a gang, a mob, thugs. But these actual people who organize around hatred, around bigotry, around rewriting history and their revisionist approach to what America was founded on, they get permits to march in the streets, they create violence. Someone died in Charlottesville last year, and yet they're allowed to come back and do it all over again. It's amazing the double standards and the height of hypocrisy that we view and discuss happening right here in the United States.
But important to point out that the First Amendment protects and allows for any speech, all speech, in the United States, which is different than many countries around the world. On this anniversary of Charlottesville, the violence that broke out between Nazis and people protesting Nazis, you remember that. And then in the days later, the U.S. president offered this perspective that seemed to have some people scratching their heads. Let's listen.
They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me, they didn't vote themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Remembering some of the statements that were uttered that day in Charlottesville, blood and soil in the ovens, statements like that. So again, those were the comments back then, got backlash when the U.S. president said them. He went to Twitter most recently saying that he condemns, we should pull this up to show it, that he condemns all types of racism and acts of violence. That's the statement from the U.S. president now. But here's the question to you. Does it go far enough given what he said last year?
No, because it shouldn't take you 365 days to denounce Ku Klux Klan members and neo-Nazis. And the reality also is that Donald Trump regularly practices racism on a daily basis. His attack of NFL players who are advocating for social justice and civil rights, his attack of LeBron James, who's building a school to empower inner city kids, or just CNN's Don Lemon, White House reporter April Ryan, Maxine Waters, and Frederica Wilson are congressional black members. He's attacking everybody. And let's start with the birther campaign. I mean, that whole birther movement was centered in racism. And he used that campaign to shake America at its core. So every wannabe Ku Klux Klan member, every neo-Nazi, every bigot who wanted to join Bigots Are Us were able to come out and galvanize and support this man because they finally had someone who allowed them to take off their hoods, who allowed them to put their racism and their bigotry on Front Street and celebrate these things that they had only talked about in their private quarters for so long. It is the environment that is in our country. Donald Trump has defiled the core tenets of our democracy and of humanity. And these are the things that I heard my mother and the elders talk about. Recording artists who said they couldn't go into hotels and restaurants. They had to go through the back. I would hear these stories about their plight during the civil rights movement and thought we would never go through this. And so to be a young man in America and seeing America almost repeat the patterns because of who's in the White House, it's a frightening thing.
Jawn, it is certainly an ugly display, but at the same time, it is a display, a mixing of different ideas and perspectives that can only happen, really, in the United States like this. Jawn, thank you so much for your time and perspective. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be right back after the break.